This is SoundStage founder Doug Schneider. You're listening to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast, your semi-regular deep dive into news, facts, opinions, and anecdotes about everything that really matters in the world of high-performance audio. Hosts Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger have more than 5 decades worth of audio product testing experience, and a few hours of podcasting experience as well. Now, here's Brent and Dennis.
Hi, everyone. It's Dennis Berger, editor of SoundStage Access.
And Brent Butterworth, editor of SoundStage Solo.
And we both write for the SoundStage Network, which is a collection of 9 microsites that cover all sorts of topics on audio, from very low end to very high end to connected audio to headphones and everything in between.
And this podcast will deal with everything from high end to low end to everything in between as well, except we're only going to talk about 3 things today.
We only ever talk about 3 things.
Yeah, but we got to, we don't want to go on forever.
Well, I kind of do. I enjoy hanging out with you, man.
But our 5 listeners out there don't want us to.
They're
just true. Looking for 45 minutes to an hour of solid entertainment.
Let's give it to them, man.
Right,
let's give it to them. All right. Hey, man, this week I want to start off with, I want to kind of interview you. Okay. I want to learn from you. I'm here for you to educate me, because there is this new white paper from Sonarworks on their blog called SoundID SR for headphones, a new headphone tuning standard. And there is a lot about this paper that I don't completely understand.
Okay.
And so I a lot of times in the course of this podcast, I will either of us will feign ignorance and ask the other to sort of inform for the benefit of the listener. Yeah. In this case, I'm truly ignorant. So I want to learn from you about this and whether there's any merit to this thing. What do you want to talk about, Brent?
I want to talk about Apple's new AirPods Pro. And what I want to talk about really is the reaction to Apple's new AirPods Pro, because they're saying that they cancel twice as much noise. And people in the press are reporting it. Yeah, Apple's new earphones cancel twice as much noise. But people who know anything about audio will say, what does that mean? And
yeah,
so I'm a little frustrated that we need to have a little bit less credulity, I guess, among journalists and not just be parroting what's in press releases. But we can talk about what does twice as much noise mean and try to figure out what Apple's talking about. And what's next after that? I
want to wrap up by talking about a review that Gordon Brockhouse did on SoundStage Simplifi. I know we're talking about Gordon a lot lately, but he has done a review of this really, really neat looking JBL integrated music system. It's a 1-cabinet solution, a connected solution. And I looked at that thing and I immediately thought, oh, I want it. And cool. if I'm craving it that bad, there's got to be something here worth talking about. So we're going to dig through Gordon's review, talk about what we like about this thing. And but let's... Cool. Before we do that, though, let's talk about the Sonarworks thing. So just as a point of introduction, I saw a post about this on Dr. Sean Olive's Facebook page. He posted a link to it, had a little bit of commentary. I followed that. I started reading. Let me just sort of read a little bit of a quote here from this piece to sort of explain to people what's going on here. And then I'm going to start with the interrogation. So the post says, Sonarworks has developed a headphone frequency response measurement methodology that yields results closely matching human perception. Based on this methodology, we propose a new standard in headphone tuning, the SoundID SR, which suggests looking at the headphone's sound as a sum of 2 components, a neutral baseline that matches the sound heard by content creators in the studio, and a curve that's either designed by the manufacturer or personalized on a user level. There's a lot that I've never measured headphones. And so there's a lot here that I don't understand. But before we start digging into my ignorance, I just wanted to get your take on this paper and sort of what you thought reading over it.
Yeah, but I want to empower you a little bit. The vast majority of people who comment on headphone measurements have never measured a headphone.
Well, that's true.
I probably only know a couple dozen people that have ever measured a headphone.
Yeah.
So
valid.
This is a long paper, and SoundWorks, they have a technology called, SoundWorks or whatever they call it, where they started out as a company that had calibration software for studio monitors. Okay. And then they branched out into headphones, and they came up with a calibration curve for headphones where they try to match the sound of a calibrated set of studio monitors in the studio, which is not real far off from Harman Curve, because Harman Curve, basically tries to match the sound of a good set of speakers in a good listening room. Okay? So it's somewhat similar, both reasonable standards. What they're really talking about here, though, is that something like Harman Curve is not really adequate because headphone measurements are inconsistent. And, all the different headphone measurement gear produces somewhat different results. And because those measurements are inaccurate, you can't really judge a headphone by the measurements. And so what they're proposing is that, it's kind of like a new business model for them. They're basically sort of making a case for them as a consultant. And they're saying that, since measurements are inconsistent, then you got to have a panel of 5 expert listeners who will listen to calibrated studio monitors and then compare the sound of whatever headphone you're testing to the calibrated studio monitors. So you can do that yourself, or you can send your headphones to them, and they will then do that. They'll run the measurement. They will do the listening panel, and they'll give you the results of all that, and they'll tell you how your headphones conform. They're, as you said, they are proposing where you have a subjectively neutral, flat response, and then the manufacturer is, then free to deviate from that as they see fit. But at least this way, the headphones are all judged according to some kind of consistent benchmark. So I guess you probably want to know how I, as a headphone measurement guy going back 10 years at least, perceive this.
I do. Yeah, there's one thing specifically I wanted to ask you about, because this is what's boggling my mind. So there's a figure in this white paper where they show a bunch of different headphone measurements and earphone measurements on a bunch of different testing rigs, from like the mini DSP ears to some Gross rigs to some B&K rigs. And to me, looking at it, there's a lot of noise in this signal, because they're not similar headphones. They're not similar. They're not consistent in the rigs that they tested on. But let's just break it down to 2 in particular, because they've got measurements of the Sennheiser PX100-2 and the Sennheiser HD650 on a variety of different rigs. And what's funny is you look at, like, let's say the 2 different Gross units and the B&K unit between the 2. And to me, I would expect to see, well, if there are some variations in the frequency response that these things are taken, then they would be consistent between similar headphones. We're talking about 2 open back Sennheiser headphones here. And I would think that these rigs would, if they affect the frequency response, affect them in consistent ways, but they don't. Like, for example, like there's some weird stuff going on with the B&K above 10K or something like that in one of them that doesn't show up in the other. And so it's like, how would you, we're talking about creating like, compensation curves, but like, how would you do that? if there's no consistency in the way these things deviate from one another, then how do you do that?
Well, one of the problems is that there's a lot. I've done a lot of consulting, and a lot of times, I don't want to say a lot of times, 2 times I've been hired as a consultant to develop a measurement regimen for a manufacturer that would predict the consumer success of the product. And in one case, I went in to fix it. Another consultant had come up with like a scoring system for products, and had said, if you do these measurements and they do this good on these measurements, and that is, this is a 75, and anything above a 75 is okay, or whatever. And they found that it basically did not predict the success of the product. It didn't even predict what, say, Consumer Reports would say about it, and Consumer Reports, has measurements and stuff. They're pretty together. So they wanted something that would predict that. And I basically told them, you can't do that. You need to have a listening panel, do the measurements and have a listening panel. And because the measurements can get you in the ballpark, but you still need to have some listeners, and don't use your own employees as listeners because they're going to be biased towards your own product, even in a blind test. Sometimes they can identify the signature of the product wittingly or unwittingly, and they'll choose that. In fact, the first company had an engineer who was notorious for, even in a blind test, he would pick out the company's own product as the best, even if it was just total crap.
Yeah.
So, and the second company basically had this, MBA sort of guy, who understandably thought like, we're sending these products to, we're giving these products to like random dudes on our staff who are good audio people, but they're still coming up with something that in their opinion is good. And I want something more consistent and reliable than that. And I basically said, then have a listening panel, because, if you can get past a listening panel of, half a dozen people in blind tests, your product's not going to suck. Will it win accolades? I don't know, but at least it's not going to be an embarrassment. And then you have ammo. Then you can say, hey, you know what? We ran it past a listening panel of people in blind tests at controlled conditions, and they liked it. So if some reviewer says, well, this is garbage, then, well, anybody can sit down and listen to any audio product and say it's garbage.
Yeah.
So, and some people are bound to do that. So there's no way you can do a measurement system or anything else that's going to assure you of success with the product. And also, this only deals with sound quality.
Yeah.
Okay. So much of satisfaction with the product is based on branding, is based on the looks of the product, is based on the price of the product. Okay.
Comfort of the product,
all sorts of things like that. And so the idea that sound quality predicts, that any assessment of sound quality predicts the consumer satisfaction with a product and the sales of a product is deeply flawed. I mean, to me, look, we do in a lot of my work, I do blind testing. And to me, the great moment is when I pull off the black drapes and everything that hide the products, and people can then see what the products are. And then we can talk about the price, and we can look at the features, and we can look at the styling and everything like that. And then people will say, well, this is probably the one I'd buy.
Yeah.
And all the tests that we're talking about here completely ignore that aspect. They are just looking to isolate sound quality in this idea that sound quality is the predictor of success. And it is not. Harman's done so much great research on this, and their research is still the standard, both on headphones and speakers. And Harman does well as a company, but it's not like they dominate the audio industry or anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I kind of deviated. I deviated from your question, though.
That's okay. That's okay. There's another thing I wanted to ask you about, too. So a few episodes back, I don't remember which episode it was, but we talked about a paper by Dr. Olive in which he showed like preferences related to the Harman Curve. And basically it broke down into three groups, sort of like most people like the Harman Curve. Some people like the Harman Curve with a little less bass. Some people like the Harman Curve with a little more bass, but those three targets, like you've covered most people.
Yeah.
But toward the middle of this paper, this Sonarworks paper, they kind of make it seem like, nope, everybody likes something completely different, right?
Which is just not true.
Yeah, and it's like they make it kind of seem like it's just utter chaos in terms of preference, and there's no real clumping. But you just answered my question. I guess it's utterly untrue. But I wonder if maybe that's.
There's some truth to it. I mean, look. No one in the press has done more listening panels than me. I started doing when I was at Video Magazine in the early '90s. And just because it was, my old mentor, Lance Braithwaite, did it with video products, and it just seemed to me like, well, that's the obvious right way to do it. I never thought twice about it. And it still is the obvious right way to do it. It's just that very few people do it. And I've done so many of these panels, and I've done, frankly, a wider variety of them than any of these researchers have. And, with all sorts, with super high-end products and low-end products and across all categories of audio. And you get chaos on listening panels a lot.
Yeah.
And, sometimes, we've done things like, I remember we did an amplifier shootout at home theater one time, and they were all, I think they were like $2,000 multi-channel amps. This was 20 years ago. So, and everybody, it was blind test, level matched, right on. You could hear little differences, but everybody picked a different favorite amp.
Yeah.
And we had an advertiser who pulled out because of that.
Oh, wow.
Who said, I just don't think that this is the right, magazine for us. And I still remember who that person was, and I never forgave him. So,
wow.
Maybe he knows who he is. I will never forgive him because nope. Sorry you didn't like our results.
Yeah.
But
they say that they had 235 calibrated targets here. That's, look, I've seen the noise of all of their overlapping measurements, and I can understand like how there would be 235 calibrated targets, but that just seems like a lot. It just seems to me that it would be, you're not really controlling your variables at that point. Although they say they had, the A/B testing results involving 147,000 individuals. So,
which is their user base, because they have a huge user base. So, they have a lot of data they can work with. And I want to address the measurement inconsistency thing, though, because there are, we've talked about this. Tyler Hertzens used to talk about this when he did the much missed interfidelity. But he used to talk he was the first guy to really publish a lot of headphone measurements. And he talked very openly about, hey, you move the headphone around a little bit and you will change the measurement. And so all these products are designed according to this. This was all standardized in, I think, the early 80s, if I remember correctly. There's a long paper, and the ear design and the resonator design and the ear simulator design and everything is very codified. But you're still going to get some differences in terms of the implementation of the way the product's designed. I use a Grass 43 AG, which is the little ear cheek simulator that sits on a desktop. Some people use a full-on, head and torso simulator. And the headphones are going to fit a little bit differently on these things. And you're going to get different results. So it's not like these things are calibrated differently. They are all standardized, they're all calibrated well, but the way you place the headphone on the fixture will give you sometimes really big differences. And what I do, what the standard says to do is to measure, I think 5 or 6 times and average it, which I don't do because my stupid audio analyzer won't do magnitude averaging. So, but what I do, which I think is actually in ways more valid, is I move it around a lot on the ear cheek simulator. And I look for what is really the characteristic response. I throw out like, okay, that looks weird. That's obviously wrong. But this is like, okay, this is the curve that I am consistently getting the most. And so that's the curve I stick with. So I think that measurements, if you're developing a product, you have your measurement gear and your measurement gear. If you're developing headphones, you've got, B&K, Gross, Head Acoustics, something like that, right? You've got some kind of a device that is calibrated, that's built by professionals who know what they're doing, and that can give you consistent results. And you will use that device, and you can judge from your curves what those headphones sound like. Anybody can look at, I've been using the same device for 10 years now, and you can look at my curves and go like, someone who's been reading a lot of my reviews can look at the curve and go, oh, that looks pretty good. Or they can look at it and go, ooh, what's up with that? And then they'll look at what my commentary said. So, and that's the way that engineers in, the real world work, is they have their measurement devices with headphones and they run their measurements and they know what it looks like, and they listen and they run measurements and they listen and they run measurements and they listen and they run measurements. And they may use a listening panel. I think a lot of headphone manufacturers do that. Or they may not. But this is a process that, if you want it to work, can work. If you want to design a headphone that is a good normal headphone, you can voice it to Harman Curve. You can get it pretty close to Harman Curve, and then you can run it by your listening panel and make some little tweaks to it from that, and you'll have a headphone that sounds good, that'll get pretty good reviews. Depending on, of course, on the brand of the headphone. And of course, there are some people, and if you say, oh, we voiced it to be close to Harman Curve, there are certain reviewers that are going to immediately dislike it just because of that.
Wow.
Well, there's if you go on the headphone forums, there's a lot of people who are absolutely convinced Harman Curve is terrible. And in my view, this has a lot more. I mean, there may be some people that listen to it and don't like it, and that's fair. But there are also a lot of people who just push back on anybody telling them what they should like. And of course, Harman Curve doesn't tell you what you should like.
It's descriptive, not prescriptive.
Right. It doesn't say like, oh, we think this is the proper response, and so you should listen to this. It's like, here's what we found, hundreds of listeners generally considered to be the proper response. So if you don't like it, it could be because from a hearing standpoint, you're an outlier, which is, that's okay too. But my whole point, so I should say, so what they're proposing on this SoundWorks thing is the SoundID thing is not crazy. It's like, okay, you run the measurement and you confirm the measurement with a panel of 5 people who compare the headphones to these calibrated studio monitors. That's perfectly fine. I mean, I kind of wish I had the time to do that. I think that the downside of it is, well, first of all, if you're a headphone manufacturer, you are outsourcing your IP to somebody else.
Yeah.
And number one. Number two, headphone developers and everybody else who develops products for anything are on, unless you're developing a super high-end speaker and it's your own company, like Jim Teal would take years to develop a speaker because it was his own company and he could. But, if you're working for any of these companies, like say Sennheiser or AKG or something, you have a deadline. And you have a certain amount of time you can spend voicing a set of headphones, and you're going to do just what I said. You're going to listen, measure, change, listen, measure, change, listen, measure, change. And you'll get it to a point. Maybe you'll run it by a test panel and you'll get their response. And then you'll change, listen, measure, change, listen, measure, change, go back through. And if your goal is some kind of neutral sound, you'll probably hit it. And to take away from that process, to say, okay, now we're going to ship our headphones to you, and you will put it through your process. And okay, how long is that going to take? How many other products do they have to do? You've got 5 people that you have to get, and rounding up 5 people, even if you have 5 full-time people that do nothing else, you still you're going to have a sub for somebody who gets sick and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And you're talking about a significant amount of time in a product development cycle that can't absorb that.
Yeah.
I think in most cases.
Yeah.
If you're a little tiny headphone company, first of all, you probably can't afford this. Second of all, if you're a little tiny headphone company, you're driven more by the owner's vision. If you're, say, Campfire Audio, let's say, you are driven more by the owner's vision. And that's what people are buying into is you want Ken Ball, who's the guy who runs Campfire Audio, you are buying into his vision and he has a lot of different types of earphones that sound different, and that's what he wants to do, but you're buying into his whole thing. If he then sends his product out for this service, well, first of all, it's going to add a lot of time to his cycle. And second of all, he's going to get back a result that's not in accordance with his vision. And we, as audiophiles, we buy into people's vision a lot. That's part of some of the appeal of all this. These are not, you can look at these as appliances if you want to, and that's fine. But we want something different. We want something more personal. We want something we can take more pride in, right?
That's a good way of putting it. Well, anyway, man, let's take a break because we've got some more headphones to talk about. Well, we're gonna take a little bit of a break, listen to some groovy music, and when we come back, we are going to be talking about Apple's new AirPods Pro.
All right. And we're back. This is the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I am Brent Butterworth.
And I am Dennis Berger.
Excellent. So we're going to move on from one discussion of headphones to another discussion of headphones because there's a lot going on in headphones this week. Apple just announced the new version of the AirPods Pro, which are one of the most successful headphones out there. And as we can see I shouldn't pick on The Verge, but there's lots of publications. I just grabbed, I saw it in The Verge, among other places. But it talks about how, the new H2 chip that Apple's using allows the new earbuds to cancel up to twice as much noise over the first generation AirPods Pro. And, that's a technical assessment of some sort. And it was so many people in the press just basically said that, the new model cancels twice as much noise as the old one. And as a headphone measurement guy, and as lots of people doing headphone measurements, but most of them concentrate on frequency response. And I've kind of made it a specialty to concentrate a lot on noise canceling because it's just fascinating to me. And I've measured a lot of noise canceling, and I don't have any idea what twice as much noise is. And I was just really disappointed that people just printed this and didn't say, well, what does that mean, Apple? What do you mean by that?
Although we have to give credit to The Verge, at least they did put it in air quotes, right? They put it in quotes.
Yeah,
the H2 chip allows up to twice as much noise in quotes, according to the press release. Which, give them credit for that. But
so they did, attribute it to Apple. But this is just such an obvious thing. That's like, if I went to an editor at some publication and said, I'm twice as good a writer as I was, last year, what the hell would that mean?
I think I've heard over the years, I've heard people confidently say that, 3 dB represents twice as much sound. And I've heard people confidently say that 10 dB equals twice as much sound, They're talking about different things, but what does that mean to you in terms of noise?
So let's try to unpack that because, all right, so here's the standards. All right, so if you increase the power of an amplifier by 100%, if you go from 100 to 200 watts, that will give you an extra 3 decibels. So that's, in that way, 3 decibels is twice as much. If you place two powered speakers next to each other, if you have a powered speaker sitting there and it's playing a certain material at a certain volume, and then you place an identical powered speaker right next to it, playing the same material at the same volume, you will get a 6 dB increase in volume. So that's twice as much. Now, it is generally accepted in audio that perceptibly a 10 dB increase in volume is perceived as twice as loud. Now, I don't quite understand that because what does twice as loud mean? I don't know. It's like if I talk real low like this and then I start talking like this, is that twice as loud? I don't know. That was probably about 10 dB.
Well, by the time I run it through the compressor, it's not going to be.
Oh, well, yeah. See, so everything is thrown off.
Yeah.
And I'm using this delightful Focusrite Vocaster 2, which in the radio mode, which adds its own compression. So who knows?
Yeah.
We have no idea what this thing's going to sound like. So, but it's very confusing. And then we're talking about increases in volume. How do people perceive noise?
Well, I'm looking at a review of yours, these Phaeton 900s, and you're looking at the sort of the graph of active noise cancellation, and you're along the bottom you're going from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. Along the side you're going from 90 dB SPL to 40 dB SPL from top to bottom, and there's a graph, and it looks like a in a weird way a frequency response graph, although it's quite slanted. But I almost like. Are they averaging that? Are they saying if it's reducing 20 hertz frequencies by this much and 80 hertz frequencies by this much, do we take the mean of those and that's how much it's reducing overall? Or do you take like the shape of the graph and maybe the volume of the polygon that creates, and it's sort of a geometric thing, and this polygon is twice the volume of this polygon, so that's twice as much noise reduction.
At what frequency are we talking about?
Yeah,
that's another good point. It's like, wait, it's noise canceling. I mean, almost nothing in audio is a flat line, right? Mm-mm. When you are canceling noise, you're going to cancel some frequencies more than others, and that's just the way it goes. And if you look at my headphone measurements, you can see that.
Yeah.
It is never a flat line. It's never even close to a flat line.
No, it looks like a mountain range. Yeah.
So it's the whole thing is just, I don't have any doubt that Apple, if you were lucky enough to find the right engineer at Apple, and I seriously doubt they'd let you talk to their engineers, you would, well, let's say if the marketing person who might talk to you at Apple, actually, digs deep enough into, what is that, one infinite loop? That big building they have. If they find the one person in there who actually came up with that, I'm sure that engineer has some justification for what they said. I just think that it's time. So what I do, I mean, for our old friend Jeff Morrison, he asked me years ago when we were both working for a different publication to come up with a one number standard for noise canceling, and because all these companies say, it's minus 20 dB of noise canceling. But, again, at what frequency?
Yeah.
And so what I did was I was flying a lot then. And so I went on, I took 4 different flights on 4 different kind of planes. And I sat in different places and just kind of randomized the whole thing. And then I recorded the sound of the airplanes. And then I went home and I did a spectrum analysis of all those. I averaged the spectrum analysis, and I found that basically airplane noise, which is, airplane noise is the main thing people are trying to block with noise canceling headphones. And noise canceling headphones can do a mind-blowingly good job of blocking airplane noise because it's so low in frequency. So I found that most airplane noise was between, I think, 100 hertz and 1200 hertz. And so what I did was I averaged the noise canceling in that range. And then, I look at, I measure at a baseline of 85 decibels, right? So when I play a bunch of noise, I play 85 decibels worth of noise. I put the headphone on the fixture and I see how much the headphone reduces that noise at different frequencies. And so I take that, and so you'll look at the curve, and it might be minus 15 at one point, it might be minus 5 at one point, et cetera. But I take the average of all that between 100 hertz and 1200 hertz, and subtract that from 85, and that's my number. And it might be minus 15, it might be minus 20. Those are, minus 20 is a good number. Sometimes you'll see a little more than that. I think the Apple AirPods Max, their over ears were. They were at least among the best I've ever measured. They might have gotten into the high 20s, maybe even 30. But it's a consistent measurement, and anybody can do that. Anybody's welcome to steal that from me. And because
maybe Apple did.
Well, they wouldn't. They got heavier duty engineers than me. That's for sure. I'm not even an engineer. So,
Brent, I just found a smoking gun that leads me to believe even Apple doesn't understand what they're talking about here.
What did they say?
So The Verge pointed to the press release, okay? And let's just break this down into Mickey Mouse terms. So the press release says cancels up to twice as much noise over the previous generation AirPods Pro. So let's try to quantify that. Let's just say they've got a system like you, and they're considering, let's say they call one unit of noise cancellation a Lauren. Okay. And so let's imagine that the AirPods Pro had 20 Laurens of noise cancellation. So that would be claiming that the AirPods Pro 2 have 40 Laurens of noise cancellation, right? But if you go to the product page, it does not say twice as much. It says up to 2 times more. So that would mean if the AirPods had 20 Lorentz of noise cancellation, then the AirPods Pro 2 would have 60 Lorentz of noise cancellation. 2 times as much is not the same thing as 2 times more. I mean, they can't even get consistent in their own language. So they're just making crap up, man.
I wonder, I'm actually, as we talk, I'm looking up, I have measurements of that product. And, that's interesting. I kind of had the idea that it was better, that it was pretty good noise canceling maybe that was based on the fact that the Maxes were so good. But I'm trying to figure out, I'm really not seeing much. So twice as much noise canceling for, you know what? I'm going to say twice as much noise canceling. Let's say that they decided that's 10 dB. That's valid, you know. Although you could say 6, but let's just say 10. And they are not that good. At least the old model was not that good. I have the measurements right here, and it's not impressive. And it's, the best I was able to get out of it, because, like we just said in the last segment, headphone measurements vary. And these are measurements done with noise, and any measurement done with noise is going to only be moderately consistent. Even though these are, by industry standard, these are smoothed to 1/3 octave, which makes them more consistent. But I'm looking at, in the airplane band from 100 to 1200 or whatever, I'm looking at an average noise reduction of about 8 decibels. That's just me looking at the thing. I didn't actually do the math. It might be more, but well, let's give them a little more. Let's say 9. Let's say average of 9.
Okay.
Could even be an average of. Could even be an average. It might, you know what? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's say it's an average of 10 dB. So if they're at -20, that's a very doable amount of noise reduction. Given that, well, they're using their own chip, but you go buy these Qualcomm chips or whatever, and the noise reduction capability in there is spectacular. I mean, a lot of companies that don't have a lot of resources are achieving great noise reduction nowadays. But Apple did not with the original AirPods Pro, but maybe the new ones. I mean, somebody's going to get in a set and ask me to measure them. So we'll see.
Well, maybe, I need you to figure out if it's 2 times as much or 2 times more, because those are very different things.
I probably won't review them, but I will. Yeah. Maybe I'll address this in a column at some point. But they are, and then another problem that you have with these measurements is now some of these things are adaptive, and so they're going to change the noise canceling profile depending on your surroundings. They're going to listen for what's going on around you and change the noise canceling profile to suit that. And the way that nobody has really tried to characterize that, to my knowledge. The way I do it is I just set all my systems for full blast, 85 dB pink noise. And because I figured that'll push the system to the max. And what I want to know is, what is the maximum noise canceling? I don't want to know, well, gee, what's it going to do if you're in your, if you're on a busy street, whatever. It's like, well, I could probably profile that and probably figure out a way to measure it. But, life's short. If somebody really wants me to do it and it's going to pay me, I'd probably do it. It'd actually be a lot of fun. Maybe maybe I should, because I know who would pay me to do that. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah.
Maybe I should.
Well, life is short, but this segment's getting a little long, so let's go take a break, man.
Cool. Let's cancel the noise canceling.
All right. Here, we'll be right back. And welcome back to the SoundStage Audiophile Podcast. I'm Dennis Berger.
And I'm Brent Butterworth.
And for today's final segment, we are going to be digging into yet another review from Gordon Brockhouse over at SoundStage Simplifi. Like I said in the intro, we're talking about Gordon a lot lately, but I think that's because he has got his finger on the pulse of the future of audio reproduction.
And
I think
does.
Yeah, I think this is the last time we talked about Gordon was, I believe, the KEF LS60 review, which is a review of 2 tower speakers with a, built-in streaming ecosystem and everything like that. And this week we're talking about a different sort of music system, the JBL L75ms integrated music system, which is just single cabinet. Looks, it's one integrated music player that's you're going to sit on a desktop or tabletop or something like that. Radically different in terms of its form factor, but in terms of its functionality and its connectivity, very, very similar.
Yeah.
But I think what's neat about this one for me is it's just a really, really cool blend of future thinking connectivity and form factor in a way, but very retro styling with sort of walnut cabinet and the old, JBL Quadrex foam grills, which maybe people don't know what I'm talking about, but if they go look at it, they Google Quadrex grills and see a picture, they're going to be, oh yeah, I remember that. So
yeah, it's like a molded foam grill with a bunch of little squares molded into it. And back in the day, in the days of the classic JBL L100 speaker, you could get them in, if I remember correctly, black, blue, or orange. So they had a real classic 70s. If you saw these speakers, you'd be like, oh yeah, that. And JBL has in fact re-released all of those speakers in modern, re-engineered versions as well. But it's kind of one of their trademarks, sort of like having all the tuning pegs on the top part of the headstock is like Fender's trademark, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like that. It's a good thing to have.
Yeah. Most of the connectivity for this thing is either wireless or network. There's an Ethernet cable. There's also an HDMI ARC port, so you could just connect this thing to a smart TV. But there's also a PhonoStage built in. I believe it's a PhonoStage, right? Not just a phono input. Yeah, it is.
It's a PhonoStage. It's got a moving magnet phono preamp, so you can add a sort of normal moving magnet cartridge. Phono, a turntable to it.
Right.
And you can use this as your full home entertainment system because it kind of connects to everything. And one thing that a lot of, all-in-one speakers get a bad rep because, let's face it, a lot of them are kind of under-engineered. And, they slap a few drivers in a cabinet. And sometimes it's, sometimes they'll just do like a woofer and 2 tweeters to kind of sort of make it sound stereo-ish. But this speaker's pretty wide and pretty low. So it's, like a low-profile horizontal configuration. And they have a woofer in the middle, like a subwoofer-ish thing in the middle. Then on each side, they have a full-on 2-way speaker with what looks like about a probably 5 1/4 inch woofer and then a 1-inch dome tweeter. So each side has its own channel, and they're actually angled a little bit, so you're going to get more of a stereo effect and more of a bigger sound than you're going to get out of a normal all-in-one speaker. And it's this is really like it's got I'm seeing here it's got a DSP based 4th order Linkwitz-Riley crossover centered on 2.5 kilohertz, which as I look at that speaker, it's like, oh well, that's what it needs, because when you have that steeper crossover like that, you're going to have less overlap between the drivers. And when the woofer's next to the tweeter horizontally, right? If you have interference between the drivers, you're going to get comb filter effects as you move side to side.
Right.
Just as you do with a bad center speaker.
Yeah.
So the fact they used a really steep crossover, and the fact that Linkwitz-Riley is basically, 2 cascaded Butterworth filters, and anything Butterworth I like. So yeah, but
hey, can I stop you real quick?
They put some thought into this. They really put some thought into the engineering. They did not slap drivers in a box for this thing.
I want to ask you about something, because you made the same assumption that I did when I looked at this thing, and upon deeper inspection, it turns out we're both wrong. So, so it does have the two tweeters. It's got a tweeter on each side, but then the larger drivers that are on each side are the woofers, and the speaker in the middle is the mid-range. So they're
weird.
They're not doing tweeter, mid, woofer, mid, tweeter. They're doing tweeter, woofer, mid, woofer, tweeter.
It's a good thing they got those steep crossovers, because the steeper crossovers
ask.
also allow you to move the drivers further apart.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, because the further apart you move the drivers, the more they're going to interfere with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the steeper the crossover is, the less they're going to interfere with each other.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to hear this thing. That's definitely, diving into the deep end from an engineering standpoint to try to make that work.
Yeah.
So,
and it's so that mid-range driver has got 50 watts RMS power on it.
Yeah.
Each of the tweeters has 25 watts RMS, and then those two woofers each have 125 watts RMS. So this thing's got a lot of power behind it, a lot of power that most people are probably never going to use, but it's got a lot of headroom, it seems. So,
yeah.
And total system frequency response of 45 hertz to 25 kilohertz. So like this thing plays pretty deep even without a subwoofer. Like the 45 hertz is the 6 dB down point. So that's almost down to like the lowest note you could play on a bass guitar.
Yep.
And then you could add a sub if you wanted to. So a lot of really cool connectivity here.
And it doesn't, and we should point out, it doesn't drop dead below 45 hertz. It rolls off below 45 hertz. So you will not lose the lowest note on a bass.
Right.
It just won't be quite as loud as the next note up.
Yeah. And then if you connect a subwoofer, it puts a filter on its own speakers, right? So that its own speakers aren't generating the low bass anymore. And Gordon was really impressed with the sound. So, and again, it's when Gordon is reviewing these systems, he's not comparing them, just against sort of desktop speakers or anything like that. I mean, he's putting them in the context of, high performance speakers. So I was really, really happy to read his review because he seemed thrilled with the performance.
And, this thing connects to almost anything you want. I mean, it's got Apple AirPlay 2. It's got, Google Chromecast. It's got Spotify Connect and Tidal Connect. It's supposed to be, they supposedly have it in for Roon Ready certification, but it's not yet certified. So it's kind of got, this is another one of those things like the KEF speakers Gordon reviewed a while back, where you buy this thing and you have your full entertainment system right there. And, you could plug it in below your TV and use it for a sound bar and then use it for all these other things. And you really kind of wouldn't need anything else. And I'm really curious to hear this thing. I hope I get a chance to hear it somewhere.
Yeah.
I don't know where I'd hear it.
You were telling me this is like an upgraded version of a product that JBL released several years back, right?
Yeah. So they had a thing called the L16, and this one's $1,500. The L16 was, I think, $1,000, and it was very similar to this.
$1,500.
Yeah.
Holy crap! Like this is a lot. This is a lot of product for $1,500, man.
And it looks beautiful. It looks really spectacular. And So the earlier model, the L16, there was an L16 and an L8. The L8 was smaller, L16 was bigger. The L16 was 1,000, and if memory serves, it had something of a similar driver layout. But this thing is shaped like a horn, like a JBL, horn off of a theater speaker. And the old one was just a rectangular box. It wasn't anywhere near as groovy looking as this thing. So. This is a really neat product. I hope I get a chance to hear this sometime. I just don't know. Since I'm probably not going to CES, I probably won't get a chance to hear it unless somebody really tries to drag me to CES. It's like, I don't know. Will Best Buy have it? They might.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Possible.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about like that. Like, where are people going to be exposed to this thing? Yeah, but you put this on like an end cap at Best Buy. If nothing else, I think just like sort of the walnut cabinet would draw people's attention, because in a world of, in a world of like black plastic and metal, and this sort of organic look of this thing really stands out. I mean, it's eye-catching. So yeah, it looks really great. It both evokes old, JBL legacy stuff, and it also looks, thoroughly modern and hip and cool. And honestly, this is easily one of the nicest looking all-in-one speakers I've seen. And I've seen some that were more expensive where they threw a lot more money at it, but this is just really nice. Yeah. I mean, it looks like you almost have to drink martinis and smoke cigars to listen to this thing. I mean, there's sort of a Mad Men vibe about it almost,
There is. So it's retro, but there's nothing
It's timeless too.
It's not dripping with retro.
Right. Yeah, it's timeless. So you could drop this thing in front of somebody in 1972 and they would be like, hey, that's nice. And you could drop it in front of somebody in 1992 and they would be like, hey, that's nice. you know? Yeah. So, yeah, it's really cool. Anything else you want to say about this one, man?
No, I'm just eager to hear it.
All right, cool. Let's wrap things up and do some credits, man. You want to do some credits?
I would love to do some credits.
All right. Well, this has been the SoundStage Audiophile podcast hosted by me, Dennis Berger.
And by me, Brent Butterworth.
And it is a Butterburger production, meaning that one of us did the mixing, mastering, and all of that. And we should say we're a presentation of the SoundStage network. Yeah, which is a collection of 9 microsites available at SoundStage.com. And you can go in there and browse all the latest, you probably access about 50 articles right off of that one page. Yeah. So who did the music, man? Oh, this will be, as usual, my music with some combination of contribution from friends like Ron Seiger and Dan Gonda, most likely. Cool. And what else do we have to talk about? I think that's it, man. I think it's time to go and let people, I don't know, watch Lord of the Rings or something, whatever it is that people do when they're not listening to the SoundStage Audiophile podcast. Oh, well, they should go watch Prey. Oh, yeah, you were telling me about that. Did you watch that yet? No, I haven't watched it yet. I've been listening to Björk's new podcast, which is just the greatest thing in the world. I'm going to listen to that. Yeah. I'm going to listen to that. It's very good. I'm going to write an article about it soon. So cool. All right, man. Well, I guess we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye.